welcome back to the Lessons for Tomorrow podcast, the motivational poster in your ear. I'm your guest, Nick Goodrum. I'm the director of the accessibility practice here at AmericanEagle.com. In this episode, as you might guess from my title, we're diving into the accessibility space and the reasons to think about it. And to do that, I actually have this nice guest right here. I'm joined by our special guest speaker from Siteimprove, Jennifer Chadwick.
Hello.
So Jen is a global senior accessibility consultant at Siteimprove. She's been the digital accessibility specialist for, what is that now? Subject matter expert, universal design advocate for 14 years. So a little bit under your belt there. She delivers training on writing, designing, and developing user experiences that are inclusive and usable by everyone. She collaborates with digital teams to improve their design systems, policy assessments, conformance with WCAG, so the WCAG Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and a strategic roadmap on accessibility. So this is across many different places like Canada, US, UK, and EU. And she is also a CPAC, Certified Professional in Core Competencies from the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. And she contributes to multiple education sources and standard groups within the Web Accessibility Initiative within the World Wide Web Consortium. A lot of acronyms, everyone. So a lot of history there. And so she's part of also the Accessibility Next Gen Mentorship Program. So welcome, Jen, and thank you for joining us on the Lessons for Tomorrow. So yes, that was quite a backstory there. So you have a fair amount of speciality here. But before we dive into it, just a reminder of why are we even talking about accessibility? Why are we talking about this? It's because really, if you think about it, you've got 1 in 5 users that most likely have some form of disability. And it also increases with age. And if you think about it, we celebrated the 30-year anniversary of the web only a couple of years ago. So you might guess the wide range of people that are trying to access the web today. And then with COVID and everything, pretty much everyone's probably using the web on a daily basis. So we need to make sure our websites are accessible to people with disabilities. And then around that, there has been a fair amount of increase in the legal space. The amount just even in 2021, almost, not quite, but almost 3,000 lawsuits around ADA Title III towards just digital properties.
Wow.
That's not all of them, but that's just the ones towards digital properties.
Wow.
So a fair amount. I don't like to focus too much on that because really there's so many extra benefits on focusing on accessibility. But I think a lot of people think, oh, it doesn't matter to me. Well, from a risk mitigation, that's important. But at the end of the day, making good user interfaces is most important. And so kind of, around all of this, a lot of these lawsuits around WCAG and around, the how do we account for everything? How do we test for it? How do we make sure they're good end user experiences? So that's where we're pulling in Jen. You've got a fair amount of experience within this. So, before we dive too deep into it, I guess just a little bit, what got you into this space?
Yeah, I think so. All those are really good reasons for. So lawsuits are never good, but it's just people enacting their right to have access to all the information, shopping, learning, studying, buying, and living that we all do. So I sort of started at, I was a user experience designer, so user experience lead, building those beautiful websites and mobile apps at one of Canada's largest banks. So that's kind of where I got my start with doing those things and having user experience be my role. But we had the benefit of having this usability lab where we actually brought people in to use our mobile apps and websites and give feedback. And then we started bringing people with disabilities or those who have diverse needs. Or it was the first time I'd ever seen anyone use a screen reader in conjunction with the website or use the accessibility features on the mobile app.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was just really interesting to see how such a wide variety of people with diverse needs, functional needs, and preferences of the way that they use the web every day. We could see that, and I was just designing completely exclusively, thinking of just one fully sighted, fully abled user, and it just opened my mind. So I couldn't unsee when it was such an amazing learning to see. Just not everyone's like me. I have my way of accessing the web. but UX, I mean, UX designers, you're not the end user. You always have to say that. So that was really where it started. And when you can't, you just sort of grab a passion for and kind of bringing the the business folks in to take a look. Did you let's observe those different things. And then quickly that particular bank was a little bit behind in thinking inclusively, not just of one user, but maybe up to 5 different needs.
Yeah.
So we quickly became a sort of advocate, going back to my team of designers, content authors, and developers, and we just collaborated to try to incorporate or integrate, I think, which is what we're going to talk about, like integrate accessibility and inclusive thinking into everything, not it being like a retrofit at the end.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. No, that happens a fair amount. Right. So was that around the AODA, so the Americans, why am I throwing America in there? So Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. Was it around that time and that was the push behind it? Because I think that's part of it too, is everyone thinks just of ADA and the Americans with Disabilities Act, but like there's international guidelines all over the place and requirements for that. So kind of your experience then in Canada, was it something very similar where there's a fair amount of push because of those kind of requirements by law?
Yeah, and it's gotten a lot better. So in the sort of Canadian way, sort of softly, like a strongly worded letter. But yeah, the AODA of all the provinces, Ontario was kind of leading the charge, to the point where we kind of looked to the ADA, the ACA, the Accessible Canada Act, the federal act. We kind of got the federal government's got their act together.
Gotcha.
But it's true. So when you start working in the space, you need that sort of scaffolding where you need the baseline as an act that's not scary. It's, you kind of want to, everyone's so reactive to lawsuits and reactive to the law, but I kind of just use it as my guide, the scaffolding around what we do. And then you become proactive, let's make sure this doesn't happen again, or you get really excited about helping bring good user experiences to people. But it is, certainly for businesses, for like banks are federally regulated by our government. Yeah. Everybody, and what we said at the time was, and I love this quote, which is like, a bank would never compromise on security measures or making sure, things like that. So we just made accessibility a non-negotiable requirement because it was the law, but also a lot of people started getting really excited about pushing the needle at that time.
Nice.
Yeah.
So then, so then you dove into that space, and then over time, of course, working at Siteimprove, getting into the consultation space. You're also, a lot of all these things, to clarify for everyone. So a lot of these all reference the WCAG, so the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and there's a fair amount of work into making one of these things. That's why, the first one was 1.0 was in 1999, right? So then it took a while to get a 2.0. So that was like 2008, and then it took another 10 years to get a 2.1. But we're kind of accelerating, and we're getting to 2.2, and we're getting a little bit faster there. But it's just because there's a lot of involvement and there's a lot of working groups. And so when did you start diving into and actually participating in some of those working groups?
Yeah, I have to say, like, Siteimprove was just right there. When I joined Siteimprove 5 years ago, I just kind of clutched the corporate, CSR report to my chest, because I knew that they were involved in global policy, as well as being members of W3C, actively participating and making sure, we were following the latest rules. So, I guess prior to that at the bank, you do a crash course, you read, WCAG overnight, and you kind of try to memorize all the all the success criteria. But it was when, really, my role as, consultant, trainer, kind of strategist to make it easy to understand WCAG. That's, it's kind of in my head, and I use it. I think you and I both sort of use it every day. So I saw the gaps, or learned from a bunch of people who are actively participating in that work, where their needs, especially as we know, like cognitive needs, or, cognitive diversity, or WCAG 2.0, is still the web content guidelines. 2008 doesn't really have much mobile standards for mobile. So 2.1, 2.2, and like upcoming 3.0, which is, a couple of years away, all of these are starting to evolve. So I thought, I'm a practitioner. It's my role to tell, designers, developers, content authors, marketing specialists, business development specialists. It's like why accessibility is important, and here are the parameters. Here's the WCAG how to meet it. So I kind of wanted to
dive into that,
and just to your point, Nick, it takes a long time because there's so many sort of people from academia, the industry, practitioners, people with disabilities, thankfully in those groups, kind of building up WCAG.
Yeah.
So it comes from a good place. It just, so I was learning a lot from others who, had those needs.
Yeah.
And were sort of saying, these success criteria need to be added. Hence, I think, 2.1 and 2.2 soon around the corner, and then 3.0 will be a different story.
Yeah,
but it evolves as we go along.
Yeah, and I think that's the clarification for everyone is that WCAG is made by humans.
Yes.
and also at the same time, technology is accelerating. I think when 2008, I think iPhones had only just been recently out. So of course, if you think about it, it wasn't that they just wrote it in 2008. They were writing it over years. So of course, mobile wasn't a consideration. But then it's like, okay, well now it's everywhere.
Yeah.
And so they have to start introducing more. So that was the 2.1. And then with 2.2, yes, they start to get into, I think, an area. So part of it too is accessibility on what is a disability. Those kinds of things over time has also shifted. So we have more understanding that there are cognitive disabilities and where those are. And I've seen more introductions with each round.
Yeah.
So don't panic when you hear like, oh, I've got to account for 2.2. It's just like, it's just adding in clarifications and nuances that most likely a practitioner that was already going through it was like, yeah, that's a problem. And now I have a success criteria to officially state that. And so it's not often that, people in 2.0 or 2.1, maybe there was a bit of orientation. There's a couple of things that, okay, maybe they weren't exactly testing for it, but on the most part, it's the same things that we're going to be testing for. But now we have a specific thing to say like, yes, that is why it's a problem. And now we can align it to that.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you have been involved in some of those working groups. And I think maybe it can shed some insights, what was it like? Because I know you were kind of involved in Silver, and you've also are in a couple other working groups. Can you kind of clarify like some of the governance that's involved?
Yeah, and just a note to everybody, listeners out there, that it's open. So please join. W3C, we want it to be open, by the people for the people. So it's no secret club kind of thing, which is really kind of exciting. So I have had the pleasure of working on a couple of passion projects, working groups. So within the W3C, there's, so W3C, www. Like managing standards for the internet. And then within the W3C, as we know, it's the WAI, the Web Accessibility Initiative. That's the department that not only produces the standard WCAG, but another great group is the EOWG, Education and Outreach Working Group. So you can join that, where so we've got the standards over here, but this is the group that works to create content for practitioners to support their understanding of WCAG, and also like really practical guidelines about how to meet it. So I'm involved in something called, it's a little sort of side project within the EO, which is ARRM, Accessibility Roles and Responsibilities Mapping. So basically just trying to make definitions of roles of those kind of just trying to make accessibility work. So what's the role of a UX designer, the visual designer, the graphic designer, the content author, the developer? Those are the core four. And then we have all those other great folks and QA analysts and everybody actively involved. What's your relationship with WCAG? Which WCAG success criteria kind of falls under your remit? Which ones are you kind of responsible for? So it's a really practical master checklist of like a guide, which has had some really positive feedback. So that's my big thing, which is sort of ownership and accountability makes accessibility less scary and more, like, as you and I know, like more people focused.
Yeah.
Once you learn the stories, or you learn how your friends and co-workers use the web, then you can't unsee, and you grab that empathy and that passion to make it happen. So it's the EOWG, and then the ACT, or Accessibility Conformance Testing Methodology and Format 1.0, is also another task force and working group within the W3C. And the whole purpose was to gather a bunch of practitioners who want some sort of harmonized rule set for meeting WCAG, primarily from a dev perspective, right?
Yep.
So it's called the Accessibility Conformance Testing Rules. So regardless of which sort of tool you're using or which methodology you're using, because we have folks in the Trusted Testers program. The U.S. government is also actively involved.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's all gather together and harmonize a set of rules, and the outcome is this fantastic sort of really clear pass fail. Like, here are all of the examples of how you can pass this particular success criterion, and here are the code examples that fail. So I've been sort of, my dear colleagues are participating in that, and I'm part of the task force to work on that. So
yeah, and I think that's
these
the
things are just helpful for those practitioners. That's why they're there.
Yeah.
Because
and kind of clarify around that is because yes, it's still made by humans, and a lot of the success criteria are just kind of more generalized, where it's just make sure that if there is some sort of image or graphical base, that there is some form of alternative, right? And that's not the literal success criteria, but more generalized for it. But it's then how do you test for that? What would be, you don't actually have to hit all of the success criteria or all the sufficient techniques. You don't have to do everything listed. It just is whether or not did you describe that image enough?
Exactly.
And which makes it really tough. And that's why, anyone that's probably looked around to say like accessibility tools, like and there's tons. There's a bunch out there of like, here's all these different automated testing tools, and, like Siteimprove and whatnot. And that's the goal, if I'm understanding correctly, is also to get them to be somewhat consistent as well, because I've seen some cheap ones that have nothing but false flags and nothing, like false flags. So like in a sense of saying like this is wrong, and you're like, but no, it's actually fine. You just aren't smart enough because it's an automated tool to really know the difference between like a background color and an image and things like that.
Yeah.
So there is this kind of gap where I think most people owning websites are like, well, then where do I go or what do I do? And so you're working on these checklists and whatnot. Do you feel that there's a good like location, or is it still in the works? Is there a good place where people can go like, all right, this is where I can at least start feeling more comfortable in this?
Yeah. So yeah, like I just to say that's exactly why we did it. We wanted to harmonize to make sure people felt comfortable in using our platform to check, and they're based on the AC2 rules. So those AC2 rules, though, are public, so they're available for everyone to see. That's a great resource, the AC2 rules format itself. And then for UX designers, developers, and content authors and visual designers who just we kind of take a plain language sort of rewrite of that success criterion, to your point, and all the techniques involved. RARRM, we have a wiki that I can always, share, but that was the whole point of that, to be, in the public domain as well, to say, plug myself in, I'm a UX designer, what are these things? So, and then, the EO, the WAI website also has really good teach and learn courses and things like that.
Yeah, I would say over time I have seen an increase. I mean, like the W3C over time has made that a little bit clearer, made it a little bit more straightforward. Like they've added quick reps, they've added pattern. Well, RA has added some pattern libraries. Everyone's trying to like be a little bit more out there of like, here's how you guys can do this. So it's definitely, compared to when I first got into this many years ago, where it was like, all right, all I have is just the success criteria and not much of other information, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot more information out there, and there's a lot more tools out there. There's a lot more to test with, which makes it a lot easier to do. So it's a lot less scary than it was, years ago, where people were like, well, what do I even do, right?
Exactly. You're not alone. So people have been trying to figure this out since probably maybe since 1.0 came out. So this is a wonderful buildup of community of people just trying to make their site successful, and good conversation pieces. There's a whole Slack channel, like an A11Y, that short form for accessibility, A11Y Slack channel, where, if you're struggling with a code, or, should you use an ARIA label versus, why isn't this working? You probably get a response in seconds. It really is an exciting community to be a part of. So we're all just trying to help each other out. So,
No, and so kind of regards to that, I know that you're also speaking yourself, right?
Mm.
So there's the Sitecore Symposium coming up, and then you're going to be speaking and presenting there. Um, and what are you trying to educate people on at the symposium?
Yeah, it's a really exciting opportunity for me to talk there, and just reach an audience who, is kind of non-technical, but may not be their immediate remit, but they want to do the right thing, and they're using these great tools to do that. My talk is really just a reminder of some of those statistics around, like, let's just be reminded it's all about the end user. So if you listen, WCAG doesn't seem like such a mystery when you start to recognize what people actually need. And there's some great statistics. There's a click away pound, like pound is pound sterling in the UK. There's
Yep.
a survey, I'm sure you know about it, that's every year, that just talks about like consumers in the UK with disabilities.
Mhm.
And it's true. It's sort of like your website being accessible versus another one makes all the difference. I actually will spend a little bit more money, even if that site's easy to use, I will go with your brand versus another one. So we know it's sort of a differentiator now, and we want to get it ahead of the curve. So yeah, what I'm just talking about in my breakout session is just a reminder of those opportunities to really not just be stuck in the lead, in an area of fear of non-compliance or a lawsuit,
Yeah.
to being really people focused and proactive. And you go from that reactive space, you're far more empowered. You're thinking about people, the
Yeah.
empathy there, the drive is there, and then you really open up your business to, statistically we know it's could be an extra 20% of the entire population, and then broken down by country, especially in the US, I think it's an extra $1 billion or something in spending power.
And, disposable income, all these things. And that's why.
Yeah.
So just a reminder, e-commerce people.
Yeah.
There is still such a huge industry-wide gap. That's why it's still for tomorrow, because even today there's still such a huge gap. And so word of mouth, right?
Yep.
I mean, you'll stand out a lot better if you're one of the first people to, unfortunately first, even though it's been around for that long.
Yeah.
Early on adopters, and kind of say like, well, I focused on the right thing. And from like the UX space as well, I'm sure you see it too, where it's just, oh, well, focusing on accessibility actually makes just better websites.
It's true. Yeah. The other thing I talk about is, and I'm sure you've seen this sort of increase in storytelling. So I just touch upon how social media, if you are a marketer and you play in that space, your brand is out there, and it's clear if you don't add captions to your video, or you don't add you put up an image with lots of text in it, and don't describe it. Those are kind of visible things. So those are things that brands can think about when they're for their next campaigns to reach everyone. But also what's far more important is people with disabilities sharing their stories. How a wheelchair getting crushed by an airline, which is unacceptable for a professional, who happens to have disabilities. Or someone who's blind using a service animal, and Uber rejecting that rider because of the animal. And these stories are told, and they are now becoming the forefront. And it's common sense.
Yeah.
It's an understanding of what people have gone through, how exclusive a lot of services and products are. So we're kind of riding a zeitgeist of an exciting time where, like, Nick, we know the medical model versus the social model, right?
Yeah.
Like the medical model says there's something wrong with you. You're always going to be this way. Society is one way, you're another. That's that. To the social model, which I think you touched upon in technology, right? There's certain pieces of technology out that are trying to bridge those gaps. So to make it, people with disabilities' lives easier and more inclusive in the market. So the social model just says that, society has, traditionally been exclusive.
Yeah.
But we can change that, maybe not bricks and mortar right away, but certainly, like to your point, in the digital world, it takes the attitude change to say, we're going to budget, put budget and training and testing and all the great things that we do to forward to get this done. And the other thing I talk about in the talk is, it's okay. It'll take time. Yeah. Like don't worry. Let's just start and keep going. Yeah.
No, and that's the thing. So like it's the shift in mentality has been away from, well, you are the blocker as a person with disabilities, and it's like, no. Society is the blocker
Yep.
preventing you from having access. And if you look at it, it's like, I always give the examples where it's like a wheelchair ramp and things like that. It's like, as a parent with a stroller, I've totally used that and been totally
Yes.
appreciative of it. And it's this kind of, oh well, focusing on these things can actually make huge improvements for everyone. And in the digital space, that's the beauty of the web is, HTML and like these core languages, they can actually be fairly accessible just
Mhm.
out of the box. Just what goes wrong is everyone adds, 4,000 layers and 20,000 pop-ups, which isn't really a good method
Yeah.
for UX as a whole. But,
Nobody wants it.
nobody wants that. But, there's so much that gets thrown on top of it that's not being checked. And what I've often seen, even pushing here where it's just like, even front-end developers, they say, oh, actually, yeah, testing for accessibility, learning about this stuff, I actually write better code, not just better code for accessibility, but just better, cleaner code. And I'm sure the same thing for designers as well. It's like you having some constraints actually make you a better designer than just saying go free and do whatever you want.
Yep,
So
totally.
I think a lot of site owners are like, oh, I'm gonna have to have so many constraints and I can't do these things. And it's like, no. Those constraints are gonna help you. Those additions are going to make it easier for all of your users to use your site. It's like if your color contrast isn't sufficient, someone's going to miss it. It doesn't even matter if they have a disability. It's like someone's going to miss that call to action.
Yes.
And then it's like if it's hard to read, it's hard to read for everyone, and
Exactly.
it just gets to a blocking point for people with disabilities.
Yeah, no, I love that point because, and sometimes we ask for statistics, and I did give some, but from the end user saying like, I'm more likely, good design and accessibility to your product is the reason why I'm using it. But the stats or the a consensus form, not everyone self-identifies as having those needs, right?
Yeah.
So to your point, like just carrying on, keep calm and carry on.
Yeah.
Building accessible, inclusive, good design proactively, and you really do solve a lot of those problems, or someone who may not identify as having that will benefit from that need. Exactly what you said. So
then for the audience, for everyone kind of listening and whatnot, do you have like tidbits on like, because I'm sure a lot of, because I still see it right even today where I think I told you the other earlier where it was like someone was requesting like, okay, we need 3.0, and it's like it's not even out yet. It doesn't even it's still in planning. And you're like, but we need to be 3.0 compliant. It's like I don't know how to tell you, it doesn't exist yet, right? So there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of aspects to it. I still feel it's just so many people are getting into this space where a lot of website owners are just starting to think about this.
Yeah.
What is your advice usually for those people that are coming straight in?
Yeah, I just maybe firstly, just thank you for the enthusiasm. So yeah, picture yourself in the kind of the middle of the spectrum where I love that like 3.0, as we both know, is kind of like a couple of years away.
Yeah.
Because it takes that time, right?
Yeah.
So 2.2 is just around the corner where it's 9 additional guidelines. Awesome. It's great news. It seems like more work, but it's not. It's just these are long-standing ones that have been missing. So those with cognitive needs will benefit, and like and mobile and stuff. So to that, I would say take a look at them. They're public. Talk them through with your team. I've sat down with a coffee and just walked through that with some folks to say, okay, I get it. So this success criteria is about making sure that automated, I can easily fill in a form. So take it upon yourself to do that. And the reason I say that is because you're kind of in the middle of the spectrum where, as we know, and it's no fault of their own, but governments are way behind.
Yeah.
They will not adopt 2.2 in the next, I don't know how many years.
Who knows?
And 3.0 is on its way.
Yeah.
And it will be brilliant. But even like the AODA, fair enough, I've helped a lot of people meet that last year. But it's still 2.0.
Yeah, it's still 2.0.
So really smart teams are kind of getting ahead of it and like focusing on that. And then you have all the future standards and all those things that will be ready by the time you get there. But just put yourself in the middle. Do better than what the law requires.
Yeah.
And then you're making yourself future proof.
Yeah.
And that's what we're saying to a lot of people in the EU because the
the
European
the EU is a little bit different. They're I mean, it's not 2.2 because it's not out yet.
But it is 2.1.
But it is 2.1. Yeah.
And the point I was going to make about that is it's 2 years old, where governments are supposed and the member states, their own governments and stuff, are supposed to meet 2.1, and that's been 2 years gone. But by 2025, it doesn't matter if you're corporate companies will also.
Yeah.
It's actually not based on who you are, what business you run. It's about the what kind of services you provide. Hey, have you got a website? You have to meet, to meet it. So a lot of companies aren't panicking. They're actually kind of getting excited to be, to meet that in the future. So they see it as, let's get ahead of the law as best. Let's always do better than what the bare minimum is that's required by law. I say that. What are your thoughts here in the U.S.?
So I mean, and this is what I usually tell people is again, it's usually filling in gaps. So it's something that you probably already need to account for. It's just filling in the gaps. So each 2 version is to fill in the gaps where it's newer tech or areas that was kind of always assumed but needed clarification. And 2 is that, yes, the government may not take it today, but they'll probably soon enough pull it in. Mm-hmm. And to me, it's always going with the idea that, well, you don't have to do it again.
Yes.
Right? Like if you're like, I built this component, but I didn't account for A, B, and C. All right, now I got to build it again to account for A, B, and C. So always best to do it with the latest standards so that you are future-proofing yourself or better preparing for the future. And so then it's always just take a look at the latest. But the clarification right now is 2.2 is still in the recommended snapshot.
Mm-hmm.
It is not finalized. And that should hopefully happen, I think, by December, something like
you're
that.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
If all goes well. I mean, there's always delays. So, but in theory, so it's more awareness. Start looking at them, start realizing what those things are. Then, of course, using those tools. There's, of course, work being done on automated tools like Siteimprove
Mm-hmm.
and whatnot to get some consistency across the board.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's tools at the ready, some knowledge areas to look into. And again, it's not one and done. It's a whole journey. So just even getting started today is going to be helpful for the future.
Yeah, you'll be in a good space. If you do that, you won't regret it.
All right. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, everyone, for tuning into the future by listening to the Lessons for Tomorrow podcast. For more information about the topics discussed today, check out the description of this episode. If you want us to cover a topic or subject, or if you want us to cover something, submit feedback, email us at americaneagle.com and let us know. Be sure to follow this podcast whenever or wherever you listen to them, and to stay up to date with us. While you're at it, I guess give us a rating, and share this podcast with others to prepare them for the future. That way, more people might get some accessibility done. Maybe just hope. And don't forget, we're also on social media and other areas. This is all, of course, brought to you by AmericanEagle.com Studios. And I am your guest host, Nick Goodrum, and Tim Elanius will catch you in the next episode.